Hi, fourth grade. So we're going to be learning about Antonio Vivaldi this week. You have a two-part assignment because I know that classical music is not your favorite, and Antonio Vivaldi did classical music. So part one of your assignment is like last week. I'm going to post two different versions of the song Gabriel's Message by Sting. He actually has a 1987 version and then a version he did 22 years later in 2009 that are pretty different. So I thought it'd be cool to tell me which version did you like better, kind of like what we did this week. Anyway, on to Antonio Vivaldi, the Red Priest. Now, Antonio Vivaldi was born in Venice, Italy in 1678, and he died in Vienna, Austria in 1741. He was the most original and influential Italian composer of his generation, and most famous for his 400 concertos, especially the Four Seasons. It was sunny, warm Venice. It was a place where you couldn't get away from the music. Gondoliers serenaded up and down the canals, fruit vendors whistled, shoemakers and shoppers sang from morning to night. Festivals, theaters, parties, and religious services required a constant supply of new music. Antonio Vivaldi's father had big plans for him. He taught him the violin, got him a job as a violinist, and sent Vivaldi into the priesthood when the boy was 15. His father and son played duets at church, and by the time Vivaldi was 25, he took a job teaching violin at the Pieta Orphanage for Girls. He was earning 4 times as much as his father. So, let's say his father earned basically $100 a week. I know you're like, that's not very much. I get that, but let's do easy math for SB. That meant that Vivaldi was earning $400 a week. Next to the big iron gate of the orphanage was a little nook in the wall, where every morning the porter checked for new arrivals. Orphaned or abandoned babies were given to the home and taught music. The girls gave concerts that were the highlight of musical life in Venice. They sang like angels and played their instruments with great skill. It was said that the Pieta had the best disciplined orchestra in Italy at the time. Yet the girls were seldom seen, if at all. And at the concerts, they were hidden from the audience by an iron gate. Possibly because some of them were deformed. Since they performed in a church, no applause was allowed, and the people expressed enthusiasm by coughing, shuffling their feet, and blowing their noses loudly. So if you look, there's almost a little shelf in the wall where the baby would be put. So back in the 1600s, when 16 and 1700s, when a baby was born that was deformed, as in maybe they were missing a hand, or maybe they had a dark mark on their face, almost like a vitiligo, or even a birthmark, or even things like Down syndrome, or maybe they couldn't hear, which is usually discovered later. But anything that could be a disability. The child was usually put in an orphanage because usually it was kind of believed back then if there was something wrong with your baby that it was because you sinned against God. Not true, but people had to have reasons for stuff. Also, sometimes babies were put into orphanages just because they couldn't afford them. So maybe it was a girl that had a baby before and wasn't married, and she had to hide it, and maybe there was no way for her to care for it, or maybe the family had 8 other kids and they had a 9th baby, and they're like, we can barely afford the 8 we have now. We're barely feeding them, so we're going to give this one to the orphanage. So hopefully it could have a better life. In this case, she could have a better life. So Vivaldi had to make sure everything ran smoothly. During intermissions, he would keep people entertained by playing his violin. He had thick, curly red hair, and sometimes he wore red robes. More people knew him by his nickname, the Red Priest, than Vivaldi. But he did not seem very priestly. He didn't say Mass. He said he had a weak condition, possibly asthma, that prevented him from getting through the long services. But others say that he was forbidden to say Mass because he was always disappearing from the altar to jot down musical ideas. Vivaldi may have been sickly, but he worked hard. He taught violin, conducted the orchestra, performed at concerts, and bought musical instruments for the school. Outside the orphanage, he toured in support of his own playing and composing. Vivaldi wrote music for all occasions, and he was one of the most prolific composers in the history of music. Vivaldi must have been full of energy and didn't have time to be temperamental. He didn't agonize over his work. He was deferential to those in authority, and he never seemed to get in trouble. That means that he didn't really care for people in authority, and he didn't do what they said. Sometimes he was playful, putting little jokes in his music, and he was terribly sensitive to criticism and was notoriously vain. He liked to boast about his fame to his rich patrons and his ability. He liked to boast about his fame, his rich patrons, and his ability to write music quickly. Some people think he sometimes lied, saying that he had written 94 operas because only 49 of them have been found. That doesn't mean he didn't, but with us only finding 49, we can only believe that he wrote 49 because there's no written documentation, even not something like, oh, we can't find the opera, but here it says that, oh, Alberti's Death or whatever opera, I'm making up names, was written by Vivaldi, but we don't have the music for it. Like, we don't even have that. We've just found documentation of 49 of those operas. So Vivaldi was obsessed with money. He always asked for the highest possible price for his music, but he also spent his money. When he died at the age of 63 from a mysterious inflammation, he died poor, his music out of fashion. Not until the music of Bach was rediscovered over 100 years later, and it was seen how much Bach respected the Red Priest, did interest in Vivaldi's music revive. So, here's some musical notes on Vivaldi. The Four Seasons is one of his most famous pieces. It's a set of 4 violin concertos, and is one of the best-known works in Italian music history. Parts of the music were meant to sound like turtle doves and goldfinches, flashes of lightning, a barking dog, fierce winds, and chattering teeth. Well, for many people today, this is Vivaldi's most beautiful work. It was also voted most boring composition by New York radio listeners in 1984. Vivaldi is actually my older sister's favorite composer. Now, if Vivaldi was really in a hurry, he'd borrow tunes from his earlier music or other composers. But then so did other musicians of the time. One of Vivaldi's greatest admirers, Bach, borrowed some of Vivaldi's work and used it in his own compositions. Excuse me, guys. So, using tunes and pieces that you've already written and just changing them a little bit, like the melodies, is actually called organicism. Not organism. It sounds the same. Organicism. That's when you take something and just manipulate it to be able to reuse it. In 1989, 2 of the top CDs sold in England were actually Vivaldi's music. So that's everything about Vivaldi that we are going to learn right now. So here's the deal. So I told you that the first half had to do with Gabriel's Message by Sting. The second half, I'm going to post 2 of Vivaldi's works, and you're going to tell me which one is your favorite and why. So you have to tell me, you have to do the part with Sting, and you have to do the part with Vivaldi. It's the same assignment, just 2 different songs for each set. So 4 different songs that you have to listen to. Classical and some classic rock. Okay? Or progressive rock, depending on who you are. All right, guys, bye. That's it.